Okay, the Cold War begins part 2. This one will focus, as it says right here, on the home front. So on the home front here, due to the growing strength of the Soviet Union and the thought of them infiltrating American society, we begin to see the Red Scare, as it says right here. Now, remember, this is the second Red Scare. The first Red Scare occurred back in the 1920s when you started to see more communism involved in the labor unions, and people were concerned that it would cause this sort of like cause labor riots and stuff like that. Not so much concerned about the threat of Russia or the Soviet Union. The Red Scare in the 1950s will definitely be a sort of witch hunt, if you will, by the government and just paranoia in general by people about if Russia is involved in all these different aspects of society. Now, the House Un-American Activities Committee will be created and will go after suspected communists. Most famous of these will be Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss is going to be convicted of espionage. What happened is Hiss is going to deny being involved with all this sort of stuff, and eventually he'll admit to the fact that he was a part of a pro-communist group and passed sensitive documents to another communist, and he'll be taken up on perjury charges. The young congressman that's going to vehemently sort of go after Alger Hiss is going to be a congressman from California named Richard Nixon. So Richard Nixon really makes a name for himself as a member of the HUAC committee. Another example of Soviet paranoia / the reasons for it is going to be the Rosenbergs. The Rosenbergs are going to be, well, namely Julius Rosenberg is going to be a member of a government laboratory, and he's going to steal secrets and give them to the Russians. His wife is unfortunately going to be implicated with him, and also they are going to be put to death for treason. The next major sort of development in the Red Scare is going to be Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin is going to start to hold public hearings, and he's going to basically claim to have a list of communists that had infiltrated the government. Now, the interesting thing here is going to be that this kind of follows the same kind of lines as, I would say, the French Revolution and Robespierre. He will really stir up society. We'll watch a video in class about it, and they'll go after Hollywood and blacklist people and want other people to rat out other communists and all this sort of stuff, which leads to the creation of Arthur Miller's famous story, The Crucible. Now, he's going to go too far when he implicates the military as being full of communists. That's going to be one of those things that people won't stand up for, and they'll really turn their backs on McCarthy and McCarthyism. But before that, paranoia sort of reaches an all-time high under Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare. One of the major sort of positive things that happen on the home front during this time period will be Executive Order 9981. Harry Truman will be pivotal in the desegregating of the U.S. military, right? If you go all the way back in like World War I and World War II, like they were even using like separate like blood banks for white and African American soldiers. But with Executive Order 9981, it will completely desegregate the military, which is a very progressive step that we needed to take. So following the Second World War, initially there's going to be a dip in the economy because it's no longer bolstered by the war effort. And so there's going to be government action to deal with that. Also, you're going to see the Taft-Hartley bill, which is going to be created to outlaw closed shops. You might remember closed shops from our talks on labor unions. A closed shop meant that everybody had to be a member of the labor union, or everybody in the shop had to be a member of the labor union. Operation Dixie, all right, and Employment Act of 1946, also big steps towards trying to fight the post-war economic slump. Now, a big sort of effort here following the Second World War is going to be the GI Bill of Rights, as you can see in the picture of the soldier pointing to it. The GI Bill of Rights is going to be in the Servicemen's Adjustment Act. And what it's going to do is it's going to give soldiers returning home money for education, okay, so they can go back to school. This is still something today that a lot of people utilize. They join up the military or the reserves or whatever and use that money to pay for college. Now, also, it's going to create the Veterans Administration, or often referred to as the VA, which is going to issue small loans for homeowners, businesses, and small farms. And this is going to be a way to, yet again, reintegrate soldiers back into regular life. And these VA loans will also fuel a lot of the suburban house buying that we'll see in the post-war time period. Also, the GI Bill, to go back to what I was just talking about in education, it will also fuel the education of these soldiers that are going to allow for, in some instances, more college degrees and a sort of more educated workforce. Now, much like any time in history, the sort of pendulum of public opinion swings. And so the Democrats, right, had been in power for a considerable amount of time. And so in 1946, we see the Republicans beginning to take control of Congress. And so it looked like this was going to spell defeat for Harry Truman being elected president again. But he will defeat Thomas Dewey, the Republican of New York. As you can see down there, the votes by states down there in the picture. Part of this will happen because of the Dixiecrats and Strom Thurmond and states' rights. So the sort of Democrats will split, right? And you'll notice down here, it's only really in the southern states, right, that are going to vote for Strom Thurmond and states' rights. You're going to listen to the backstory podcast segment about this, probably following this or before this. The sort of famous situation is going to be that when people went to sleep, Thomas Dewey was leading the votes, and everybody assumed that he would win. But in the end, Truman comes back and wins relatively handily over Dewey. So as you can see here in the picture, right, Truman's holding a famous newspaper that says Dewey defeats Truman, when in actuality Truman wins. The last little bit here on the home front, you're going to start to see migration of people across the country. A lot of this followed the movement of government subsidies money, right? A lot of businesses had been pumped up by the government, and basically a lot of those businesses were out west. And so you start to see people moving across the country. So they're going to move into what they refer to as the Sun Belt, right? The Sun Belt kind of think of as, places that are sunny. So think Florida, Texas, Alabama, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, that kind of thing. Besides that, we're going to start to see a rush into the suburbs. Remember, we've talked about the suburbs before, back when the sort of boom of the Gilded Age, rich people moved out to the suburbs. Well, what's going to happen now is you're going to start to see middle America moving out to the suburbs. A lot of this is going to be through the Federal Housing Administration and loans, and also the beginning of Levittown type suburbs, which were kind of like tract housing or prefabricated housing that we could put up fast and cheap. And so people moved out of cities to have their own homes, so they had larger houses than they did before, but they would now have to commute into town, which is going to foster what we refer to as car culture, and we'll look at that more in later chapters. Now, with all these soldiers coming home, going to college, buying houses, moving out to the suburbs, a lot of them were getting married and having children as well. So this is going to create what we call the baby boom, over 50 million babies by the end of the 1950s. So there's going to be this glut of population. It's going to just explode. So what this is going to do is going to put a strain, as it says, on certain aspects of American life. So think public schools, right? All of a sudden you have way more children that need to be educated, or you have, a lot more people that need maybe food stamps, or you have more people that need to deal with this sort of glut of babies. Eventually it'll turn into a bunch of middle-aged people, and today it's a bunch of old people that are, using the healthcare system, right? And what this does is going to pose an interesting problem for the United States through this generation and as it grows up. Besides this, it's also going to create new industries and markets, right? So you're going to see the creation of baby-only things and baby-specific things, and lots of questions that hadn't been raised before the 1950s are now going to be, answered by the market because of all these babies.